Hey, Iron Nation, Barry Lusk here in Atlanta, Georgia. I get to serve as the city director for Iron Forums here in Atlanta. And this is one of my newest friends, Jamie Johnson. Jamie is with Boy with the Ball, and I've gotten acquainted with Jamie and his son and really a good portion of their team. And I'm just so impressed with who they are and what God has called them to. So Jamie, thanks for being here. Would love for all of Iron Nation to hear what you guys do at Boy with a Ball.
Well, great. First of all, Barry, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here with you today and excited to be your friend. So Boy with a Ball, our whole focus is young people. And what we really do is we launch young people as change makers who ignite citywide movements to transform hurting neighborhoods. And those neighborhoods can be slums, which they often are, refugee camps, and they can also be hurting schools. And so we work here in Atlanta, and this is where our headquarters are. We work across the United States in several cities, but then also in Latin America, across Africa. Wow. And then we just launched, of all places, into Lebanon in this moment. But the biggest thing that we would just say is that we believe that young people can be mobilized to turn the world upside down. And we got this idea from a guy named Jesus who took these 12 guys.
He was good at that.
He did, and he did pretty well, didn't he?
Yeah. And I've gotten to meet some of those young people that you've worked with and developed and trained up. And now there are, even in our very community, business people who are better because of even the work you guys are doing. And so we want to talk today about the calling of God. And recently in your office, we had a conversation about how the reality is wherever God plants any of his people, that is a kingdom post.
That's right.
But that there's also resistance outside of us and inside of us to sometimes even believing that, much less living it out. And there's three paradigms we can operate out of, and we kind of bounce around in all those. One is the world's paradigm, the other is the church's paradigm, and then there's the paradigm from Scripture. We may at times think this way. The world would say, it's all about me, it's all about the here and now, nothing else matters beyond here. Any ends in business justifies the means to get there. I'm in charge of myself. I'm responsible for myself. And so nobody else is going to be looking out for me, so I better look out for myself first. That's the world's way. And the church's way, the church would say, hey, don't think like that. Don't think like the world. Go be bold. Go reach people for Jesus. But I also think the church at times falls short, particularly as we talk about the call of God on businessmen and women. One of the ways I think we fall short, or the way we can think about how we see the church falling short, is I've been in churches many times, and maybe you have too, where someone's call into full-time vocational ministry is celebrated, and they're brought up front and they're prayed for. And probably many of you have seen that in churches that we've been a part of. Have you ever been in a church where a marketplace leader was brought up and celebrated for their call into the marketplace?
Not been often.
But you have been?
I actually have.
I've never been.
Good church.
But not often.
Not often.
Not often. But what if churches celebrated that? What if we celebrated as much of what was going on Monday through Friday in our people's lives as we do what's going on Sunday morning? Right?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate what you're saying, that there are the pressures from the outside and there are the pressures from the inside. But going back to what you're saying, every job that we have is a kingdom post, regardless of where we're at. So here's the question: is what does it really mean that that's a kingdom post? And the question of whether it's kingdom is what has the influence over it? What has dominion over it? Yes. And if the king, who is Jesus for us, if the king has dominion over it, if he has the influence over it, then it's a kingdom post. And it was St. Augustine back 1,500 years ago in his book, The City of God. He was making an apology for the fact that Rome had become Christian and then Rome fell. And he was trying to say that it wasn't Jesus' fault. But his big point in the book is that there is the city of God, those who are turning to and receiving their direction and their life from God, and then there's the city of man, those who aren't. The challenge of the having these amazing kingdom posts where we can make so much influence first comes down to the challenges. Will I turn to the King and give him influence over my life? Will I seek out, of course, the Word of God? Will I seek to grow in him? But also, how much of my day is being led by hearing him speak to me? Or, a guy named Brother Lawrence learned how to wash dishes while practicing the presence of God. He stayed connected to Jesus, and Jesus himself said, "Abide in me and you'll bear much fruit."
Yes.
So this question of kingdom post, there's resistance from outside. Yes, we're not going to be always celebrated in the church the way we might if we sang a beautiful song or led an incredible worship service or preached a great sermon. But we can change the world, actually.
Yes.
That's why the enemy is resisting it. But we have to kind of lay aside every other influence and just turn back to the King. And will we love him? And will we allow him to direct us into our days? And if we will, it's pretty crazy. This is the really interesting question, is that king had influence over a little shepherd boy named David, that king being Jesus. He leads him into a battle, and by the end of the day, David's on his way to being a king. So if that can happen for one kingdom worker, what would happen to our businesses? What would happen to us as leaders? What would happen to the leaders under us if they got a hold of that same influence of the power of God?
And that really is the biblical paradigm.
It is.
One king, his kingdom, living for that, taking Paul at his word in Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, whatever work you do, do it wholeheartedly as serving the Lord and not man. There is great resistance, though, even inside of us sometimes. And Paul said this as well. Even when I want to do good, even when I want my work to be good, evil is right there with me. And so that's why I think we have to continue to revisit that biblical paradigm, that calling. A couple of resources that I want to suggest to Iron Forums is wherever you download your music, whatever your preference is, go search Porter's Gate. And particularly look for two songs, Establish the Work of Our Hands and Your Labor is Not in Vain. And both of those songs, Jamie, I don't know if you've heard either of those, but both of those songs are based on passages of Scripture turned into a prayer saying, Lord, you be the one to establish the work of our hands. Lord, you be the one to help me remember our labor is not in vain. And then another resource I've shared with a few of you, released in 2020, Michael Hyatt's book, Entrepreneurs Will Save the World. And I just want to read a quick encouragement to you guys about just the power of the call into entrepreneurship, because many of you who are listening are entrepreneurs. This is what Hyatt says: we should be applauding and celebrating entrepreneurship, not putting a vice grip on their activities or shaming them when they enjoy success. Entrepreneurship is a social good. Helping your community by solving problems is virtuous. Making money and providing jobs is virtuous. Contributing to economic growth is virtuous. And you were sharing a quote with me earlier. I want you to share with our group. It reminds me a lot of what Hyatt is saying there.
Read this one too, but one of the traps and one of the resistances is we start to think that it's only kingdom if we stand in the middle of our workspace and shout, will you come to Jesus?
Yes,
and
right.
I think what's being said there is so powerful, is that doing great work, doing work as unto the Lord, it'll draw people to him. And so Martin Luther, he said, the Christian shoemaker does his duty not by putting little crosses on the shoes, but by making good shoes, because God is interested in good craftsmanship.
Yes, amen. I love that. I love that. And so that's a paradigm we have to fight to stay in all the time, that good work is pleasing unto the Lord. I tell you what, in this age of information anxiety, digital learning, post-coronavirus, we are so prone all the more to isolation. And I think one of the things that we all realize is we can't do this alone. Yeah. I left to myself, I'm often going to believe something outside of the biblical paradigm and therefore practice something outside of the biblical paradigm. We can't do it on our own. How have you seen that to be true in your world?
Well, I mean, you kind of think of great mountain climbers. You know, you've got to be throwing the hook way ahead of you and then helping each other climb. And it's true is that when you're climbing in a world where the enemy has influence and where faithlessness is common, where you're basically breathing different oxygen than everybody else, you're going to have people around you. I was at a church and speaking on this exact subject, and a great lawyer, a famous lawyer in Mobile who'd been a part of this church, which is a great church for over 2 decades, he got up and he came to me at the end as we were talking about marketplace leaders. And he said, this is the first time that somebody has validated my work in this sanctuary in 2 decades. And it's what you're saying. But what happens by the fact that you're not necessarily getting the backing and the integration of your work being spoken to within churches and stuff like that, what can happen is that it isolates you, is what you're saying. Right. But there's an interesting backsided curse to the isolation. Part of it is you're not getting the support and the accountability and stuff like that as far as provoking you into the great things. But the other part of it is you start to get used to working without accountability. Like you're, specifically if you're a marketplace leader, you're the boss. And so there's no one who challenges you.
The world says you're due that. It's yours.
It does, but at creation we hear it's not good for man to be alone, so you've got those conflicting messages. And so what it just keeps you from doing is absolutely great work. There is so much creativity to being a kingdom leader. The influence and the way the Lord has you do it will be different than anyone else. But having people next to you, and I've been to Iron Forums, that's an incredible place to do that, who can share their stories and who can iron sharpen iron you is really powerful.
I love it that you took us all the way back to Genesis just to remind us again of it's the biblical paradigm. God is the one who decided it's not good for us to be alone. He doesn't want us doing this in isolation. And I think an important just kind of last point to close with is the idea that living in light of our kingdom post transforms us. I mean, we talk all the time in Iron Nation, we want to be a people who are transformed. We want to be living our lives based on truth that leads to a transparency, to attraction, and ultimately a transformation for the leaders, for their families, and for their businesses. So have you seen that play out in your world?
You know, the point that we were making together as we were talking is that moving past just the bottom line to seeking kingdom impact will transform you, it will transform your business, and it will transform your community. And the real truth is, you know, the central part of Boy the Ball is a program called Love Your City. Yes. And we started by, you know, it's love young people or love hurting people, but the truth is the entire city being mobilized out of hyper-individualism, like you're saying, to engage and to connect. It's good for everybody. Yeah. And the point that I think we want to make today is it is great for your business. It's great for your employees. I was talking to, the biggest issue for us in business is really culture, because culture wins. When you're trying to mobilize a group of people to do things you've never done before and to go beyond where you've ever been, culture is the kind of thing that pulls you past just what's predictable or what is linear to what is possible. And so I was talking to a business owner in Southern California the other day, and he was talking about a business that had this juggernaut accountant. She was just the best accounting person that they had ever had. But every single person who worked with her, it was toxic. It's like they either wanted to quit or they were weakened in their commitment to the company. And so the boss sat her down and he said, you're a great worker. And she said, I know I'm the best you've ever had. He said, it's true. He said, I'm not going to argue that. He said, but you weaken us when you interact with our other employees. And that's an issue of culture. We've got to address that. And she said, I quit.
On the spot.
On the spot, she said it. And this is the issue, is if you build an entire company, because there's some part of us that just thinks part of me as a business leader is I've just got to build everything on the bottom line. But if you build it on the bottom line, then an associate like that can turn and say to you, hey, what you're asking from me of culture is beyond the bottom line. Yes. So you just realize very quickly that part of our work is to build in our business culture that goes beyond the bottom line. And it's transformative. Years ago, I was sitting with the same leader who told me that story in Orange County, and he said he owns a landscape consulting company, an interesting company. And he said, the other day I turned to all my workers and I just said, in the stepping out, I'm just going to challenge you guys to be generous. And they said, what do you mean? Like, we have to give money? He said, no, you can be generous in a billion different ways. I'm just going to challenge you to do it. And so nothing happened for a few months. And he had this really kind of quirky office administrator. And at one point she turned and she said to him, do you know what they're doing? And he was like, what are you talking about, what they're doing? And she said, do you know what all the employees are doing after you challenged them to be generous? And he said, well, what are they doing? And he said, well, that guy, he's taking cancer patients on Saturday to the hospital. He's giving them a ride, and then he's taking them out to lunch afterwards. And then she pointed to that guy and that guy. She started to share the stories of what had happened. And their company was doing better, but then she said, me? She said, I go to a dojo, I'm a black belt. And he said, you are? She said, yes. And she said, first of all, I started going online and Googling you, and I found that you speak at your church, and I listened to all the messages, and I have all these notes and questions. So that was interesting. But second of all, she said, I realized you have a heart, and that's what you're pushing us to is who you are, and you want us to be who we are. And she said, there's a teenage boy at our dojo who he's an at-risk kid. His parents can't really afford the classes, but he got a scholarship to begin with. And he's doing great, but now the scholarship's over and he's about to drop out. And she said, so here's my question. Would we be willing to fund this guy continuing towards his black belt? And this guy was a good businessman. He said, well, would you go to your dojo and see if they'd split it with us? and they did. They did, and they split it. But those are the kind of questions of like how on the very grassroots level this starts. But I was working in San Jose, Costa Rica in a slum, just probably around 2008. And the slum, we were going in and mobilizing young people to get to know everybody in the slum and to start to help families make it out of the slum by helping their kids make it through school. And a rising tide lifts all boats. So as the income levels were rising, everyone was making it. We ended up funded by the State Department. I got to present this story at the World Bank. But during that time, a major alcohol importer was the business right across the street from the slum. And so I knew the leader of HR there, and she'd gone to an international school that we knew of. And so she said, would you come talk to us about being involved? And so we sat down. She said, I'm so glad you're here. We drive by this slum every day. She goes, we were just wondering how we could be involved. And I said, well, Maria, I'm so sorry I can't offer you that. And she looked down at me. She doesn't have a lot of time. She said, why are you here? What are you talking about? And I said, well, I can't offer you to be involved in the community. You're an alcohol importer. Alcohol is flowing freely into the community by 2 p.m. We have to get out of there. So I can't offer you something you already have. And she winked at me and she said, okay, well, what can we do? And I said, well, you could be involved. We're starting tutoring centers. We need more personnel. So they would shut their business on Thursday mornings and go across the street and they would help run a tutoring center. Got to be where that community started to be a part of their Christmas celebration. It changed their business. Their business, one of the best businesses. But that community, that slum is no longer there. Everyone rose out of poverty, and that's part of their business's story. So you've been placed in this kingdom post. You're going to impact an employee. You're going to hire a kid. You're going to develop an employee. You're going to change a market for sure. But then you never know what kind of creativity could occur that could allow you to transform your city.
Yes. And sometimes it's results like that are so big, all we can do is say, God, thank you for giving us the gift of faithfulness. Yes. You caused the result.
And those employees that are working with you are never going to forget it. Yes. And where else will they find a job like that?
They want to stay.
That's right.
So it helps with retention too. I think just in closing, as we think about Kingdom Post and some responsibility with that, to live under the King, to spread the influence of the King, to build his kingdom, that can actually feel weighty. And it reminds me of a story, maybe I've shared it with some of you. Years ago, one of my sons and I got a call on a weekend, a call I know we all love, and that call was, can you help us move? And it was one of my staff at the time, and so we logged it in that day. We got some work done, but the part of that day that I'll never forget, and God just really taught me something about whatever Kingdom Post he would ever call me to. And Dawson at that point is 4 years old. He does not have the ability to pick up a whole lot of weight, but he saw an item in the truck that probably weighed the most. Now he's mid-20s now, so we're talking about 20 years ago, and it was a large tube TV. And we just looked at it together, winked at each other as if to say, let's go get it. So we both got around it, squatted, put our arms around it, lifted it together, and got it in the house, in the entertainment center in one piece. Wow. And what did we do? We high-fived, we celebrated. we did it. And the thing that God reminded me of that day is that kingdom post-influence would never be put in my hands to the degree that it was ever out of God's hands. Just like that day, there's no way I was going to let my 4-year-old attempt that TV. It was still in my hands. It was never fully in his. And I just wanted to share that as an encouragement that God's got this, that he is the king of the kingdom. He's the Lord of the harvest, and he's the one that's building, and we get the privilege of being used. So thanks for being willing to share with Iron Nation with me today, Jamie.